All right, so the next panel, here we are. It's a conspiracy. And we have some people who know a little bit about these things. We'll start with Barbara Drescher. And she knows about people and how they act, especially when they act like brats, if you saw her presentation from last night. And that makes you feel very bad about humanity in general. So she will correct people when they get off base on how people think wrongly. It's about right.
I'll try.
And Ben Radford, who's been dealing with this stuff pretty much his entire life.
More or less, yeah.
Yeah, if everything from Loch Ness Monster to ghosts to chupacabra to UFOs to ghost porn, which a couple years ago you even did a presentation about that.
Thanks,
Derek.
Derek.
Remember that one? Some people still remember it. And then we have Steve Novella. We'll make sure that if it's something to do with the brain, it's not going to be supernatural, and he'll tell you why. Right?
Sure, if you want me to. Absolutely.
And Dave McRaney, who does You're Not So Smart, or you're dumb, or less dumb, we can't figure out anymore because he keeps telling you if you're smart or dumb, we don't know yet. And he'll tell a wee bit of that as well. So this panel is mainly about the fact that conspiracy theories keep popping up, even though we, the skeptics, knock them down, and then there's a new one that comes up every day. I even took the time right before the panel to look on the internet, and of course there's new ones, and especially you go to websites like Ford's News. See, there's one right there. We have EVP in the room. And so I opened the thing about the fact that Michelle Obama was involved with Joan Rivers dying in a hospital, and they're covering it up. She didn't go in there for surgery.
That's likely.
Okay. That's random and weird, but somebody's going to believe it. So why does this happen? Steve.
Go. 5 seconds, go. Seriously? Why are there conspiracy theories in 5 seconds? I like to say that everyone has a little conspiracy a little conspiracy theorist inside of them. There's just certain basic psychological reasons why conspiracies speak to us. We have a need for, first of all, simplicity. We like to feel like we understand and can control the world. And a conspiracy theory is a nice, simple narrative that we can understand. It also puts us in a position of we're the army of light revealing the conspiracy. So we like to we're either the hero or the victim in our own narratives. We're never the villain. So that conspiracy theory makes you both a victim and a hero, which is interesting. And there's lots of also, and I'm sure Barbara will talk about this a lot as well. There's lots of psychological mechanisms in terms of control. So if you think that you sort of have seen the man behind the curtain, maybe that therefore you're not going to be vulnerable to whatever the conspiracy is, or the conspirators. You're not going to be duped because you know that the government is really doing this. That the Newtown shooting was really, that was the government doing that. So we're not going to fall for that. So there's it puts you in control in a way. Although I always think, to me, that makes the world a really scary place. If you think about, the shadow government is really running everything. In a way, it's a really scary place. But I guess just the sense of understanding and knowing and being in a privileged position to see behind the curtain trumps the fact that it is painting the world as this really dark place.
That word privilege, I think, is important. If we feel like we have something, we have some scarce resource, we all know that we love to collect things, and we like to collect things that other people don't have and things like that. Well, knowledge is the same way. If we think we know something that other people don't know, there's something special about us. And I think that also helps us feel, like you said, protected from the problem itself. If we know it, we're not going to be affected by it.
Yeah, I think it's sort of the lure of the unknown and secret. People love secrets, right? Everybody likes to know gossip, everybody likes to know secrets.
this is the secret to losing 20 pounds in 20 days. This is the secret to this, how to buy a new car, this and that. And so everybody inherently wants to be on the inside. It's like, well, do you want to be one of the sheep, or do you want to know what I know? And, come subscribe to my newsletter, printed in crayons, and you'll be the first to know, or these days online. And one of the things that I find fascinating is that a lot of times conspiracy theories overlap and masquerade as legitimate media criticism, because what the conspiracy theorists do is they say we're just asking questions. We're not saying anything. We're just raising questions like, what about Building 9? What about this? What about that? And so they just throw out all this sort of a gish gallop, if you're familiar with that. They just throw all the stuff. What about this? What about that? And it's not that the skeptics don't have an answer for them. It's just that, what part of this what part of this don't you get? And so because the conspiracy theory promoters cast themselves as defenders of the truth, like Steve was saying, that who would want to be in on that?
And correct me if I'm wrong on this, Steve, but when we talked about this before with how ants sometimes get into the ant death spiral, where ants have an algorithmic system to follow other ants, and sometimes they can get into a loop, and that loop can extend until the entire colony. There you go. Ants can get into a spiral sometimes where one ant is following the other, and that normally is an adaptive response, but it can totally destroy a colony when the entire colony gets into a circle. So human thinking can also be algorithmic in that way, where we kind of get stuck in a logic loop where we can make this perfect container for a belief, where if there's missing information, that can be looked at as being part of the conspiracy, and if there's something that seems to disconfirm your assumptions, you can assume that someone is making that, as creating that so that you will think that way, and they're trying to cover up whatever they're doing. And it's almost like when you play a video game and like an NPC is bouncing up against a wall over and over again.
Yeah.
It's normal response to a certain situation is getting stuck in a loop and it can't get out of it again. And conspiratorial thinking can be like that sometimes.
Yeah, it's a logical trap.
Mm-hmm.
You get, the problem is, I think it comes down to, confirmation bias and not wanting to be wrong, because if you're wrong, then that opens up the door to the possibility that you're wrong about a lot of things, and therefore you can't predict or control them. If you think you know it, and everything that comes in, even as we're developing as small children, every bit of information that comes in either has to be assimilated or accommodated, right? So either it matches what we already think, and we can just kind of fit it nicely into that schema that plan, that vision, that idea that we've already adopted, or we need to change that plan, that schema that we've already adopted, and it's much easier to work it in sometimes, even if that means doing a bunch of mental gymnastics, because then otherwise we have to give up these heartfelt, deeply held beliefs just from that one piece of evidence.
Mm-hmm. Jesse Walker, he's got a book called The United States of Paranoia, and he says in it that if you notice a lot of conspiracies, the people who believe in those conspiracies wouldn't be upset if it turned out to be true. So, if Barack Obama really wasn't born in the United States and his birth certificate wasn't real, it wouldn't be a bummer to the person who believes that's so. And it's it plays into what you were just saying. It's an underlying confirmation of what you would, of your worldview and the social identity that you have that's around that worldview.
That was one of the things that struck me when I was researching conspiracy theories around 9/11, is that many of the conspiracy theorists are pro-Bush. They're hardcore right wingers. And I was like, you do realize that part of your theory is that Bush was behind this, right? Like, well, yes or no? Like, well, which is it? How can you be pro-Bush and still think he was behind it? But they don't. Never the two they meet. They go, oh, okay, whatever.
Yeah, there was that recent survey that trying to characterize how many conspiracy theories do people believe in, and if you believe in one, you're more likely to believe in other conspiracies. And essentially, there were people who believed in like one or two conspiracies that were in line with their ideology. So like if you were really hardcore anti-Bush, you might buy into 9/11 because, hey, you know Bush is an asshole. And then there were the conspiracy theorists who believed in every conspiracy, regardless of ideology. And that's the people that Penn is just talking about. Even if it's a conspiracy, they have to believe it. Even if it's against their ideology, they just compartmentalize that. You know, I don't worry about that too much. But the conspiracy has got to be real because they're a conspiracy theorist. So, but there are the one-off conspiracy theorists who just buy the one thing that goes right in line with their political ideology.
One other point, and tell me what you think of this. This is something else that was in that Jesse Walker book. He said that he looked at animism, and he thought conspiracy thinking and animism were very similar. The animism was sort of a belief based off of agency behind a natural phenomenon, and conspiratorial thinking is finding agency in a social phenomenon.
I agree. It's what we call hyperactive agency detection. When psychologists have those kind of technical terms for stuff. And I totally agree. I've written about that as well. I think that it's just the tendency to see the invisible hand behind random events. And and to see it's like a form of pareidolia. You're seeing pattern and noise. The problem is, and this is also, there's some to get to the neurological angle. The conspiracy theorists are lacking they have a decrease in their ability to reject an apparent pattern because it doesn't square with reality. So the way our brains basically work is we're always hunting for patterns. Again, we like to find patterns. We see patterns everywhere. And when we see a pattern, another part of our brain goes, okay, but is that real? Is that a real pattern, or can I ignore it as an illusion? Is it just noise? And conspiracy theorists, when you look at how their brain functions, they are not rejecting the patterns. They see a pattern and they tend to accept it. And it's really, if you've ever spoken to them, you'll know it's really hard to convince them that the pattern isn't real. To them, the pattern, it's gotta be real. Like the notion that it's a coincidence is laughable to them. Their brain doesn't work that way. They can't reject the pattern, no matter how at odds it is with reality. They literally have a decreased reality testing, and so the patterns are unfiltered, if you will, and so that's how they see the world.
I think that's really interesting because if you look at instead of comparing people who believe in conspiracy theories with people who compare them with people who don't, compare them with people who believe other types of phenomena that a lot of skeptics reject, like paranormal phenomena. And there's actually a difference. I mean, there's not a big difference, but there's some basic, personality profiles that are slightly different among people who believe in conspiracies and things like Bigfoot. Things where you can get into how the explanations are more scientific and more reality based. So whether or not it matches reality isn't the issue. Is where their explanations coming from? Are they physical and real, or do they involve paranormal phenomena? And what you get with people who believe in ghosts and things like that is the same kind of recognition, and even religious icons and things like that with pareidolia, but their explanation for them is different. And there's a slight difference in personality profiling that way. It's really fascinating.
One thing, you're mentioning Bigfoot and ghosts and all that, and one thing that's interesting about conspiracies from a skeptical point of view is that, of course, conspiracies do exist. There really are conspiracies. There's no, that's irrefutable. The same cannot be said, of course, for Bigfoot, ghosts, and chupacabras, but conspiracies absolutely exist. And so this is what they fall back on. It's like, well, we know some conspiracies exist, and so they go into these, and they go, they'll go into the Kennedy assassination, this and that and the other. And Bin Laden, and so someone's like, oh, well, what about the 9/11 conspiracy? I was like, yeah, of course it was a conspiracy. Oh, you admitted it! It's like, yeah, I thought everyone knew that. It was a conspiracy. Bin Laden, Al Qaeda, this was a conspiracy. Was 9/11 a conspiracy? Absolutely. No doubt. Oh, you mean Bush behind it? Well, there's less evidence for. Same thing with Newtown shootings over else. But what's interesting is that almost invariably, conspiracy theorists are not interested in true conspiracies. This is, just
because everybody knows it.
Well, no. I'm reading the New York Times, and I think Bank of America, if I'm not mistaken, just a couple weeks ago, they pled guilty to a conspiracy.
But that's not privileged information, is the thing.
No, but that's what I'm saying is to them, I mean, there are all sorts of legitimate business, industry-related conspiracies.
That's just to throw you off from the
Oh,
real
well, right, right.
False flag.
They,
False flag
they don't want to hear about that. No, they don't want to. I was like, well, hold on. Check out these. How come these doesn't bother you? Well, because, it doesn't fit my agenda.
Doesn't fit the narrative. I
Right.
mean, their narrative is the grand conspiracy. So when people, the conspiracy theorists say, well, there are real conspiracies, therefore it's plausible that my conspiracy is correct. It's like, yeah, but there's a fundamental difference between Bank of America and terrorists in a cell conspiring to perform a heinous act versus the grand conspiracy that would require hundreds of people, thousands of people. The press would have to be complicit. Both parties would have to be complicit. I mean, or multinational conspiracies over multiple generations. The size of the conspiracies that we talk about when we talk about conspiracy theories would be so huge. I like to say they would collapse under their own weight. Even like for the JFK conspiracy, we interviewed Posner about it. He wrote the excellent book, Case Closed. He said, you know what, in 1965, 66, if you thought that JFK was murdered by a conspiracy, that was a reasonable hypothesis back then. There wasn't enough evidence to say that it wasn't true. It certainly was something worth exploring. But in 2010, 14, whatever, no. I mean, if that were a conspiracy, it would have come out by now. I mean, just now the conspiracy would have to be so massive it becomes inherently implausible, and that's the difference that they're not seeing. They don't like the plausibility argument because, of course, it completely undercuts their narrative.
And they seem to have so much confidence in the ability of this group to cover everything up, but no confidence in journalists to uncover it. It's like
Because they're complicit.
The conspiracy, the people creating the conspiracy are like super malevolent geniuses, and there's no one as smart as those people except the people who figured it out.
But they're simultaneously stupid,
Right.
Because they have to reveal themselves to the theorists, right? So they have their mad power, reach, foresight, skill, control, but they make the most ridiculous mistakes that the conspiracy theorists can see through.
Well,
at the same time,
like the Denver airport. Do you know? Any of you know the Denver airport conspiracy? There's a whole conspiracy regarding the Denver airport and how it's laid out, and may or may not look like a swastika, may or not have Illuminati, blah blah blah. And part of their theory, I shit you not, part of the theory is that there's a mural in the airport, and according to the conspiracy theorists, if you know how to read the mural, it's all there. It was all laid out for you. The depictions, this and that, this symbolizes that. And if you know how to read the mural, then they weren't hiding this. They're letting everyone know exactly the whole conspiracy is all laid out for you. If you know the magic words, if you
have the privilege.
If you have the privilege of
knowledge,
it's just
That's
astonishing.
Special knowledge.
Right.
It's
right.
narcissism. When you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Well, one other thing I find fascinating is that one of the central elements to a lot of conspiracies is that they have this straw man argument that the official story is this. Well, I don't believe the official story. Do you believe the official story? Come on, you're an idiot, right? And I've talked to people like, which official story are you talking about? Well, like for example, the Newtown shootings, and they'll say, well, the official story is like, well, where is this official story? I haven't read it. Oh, you mean a collection of hundreds of independent news journalists, reporters, who certainly in the hours and the days after the Newtown shooting, they say different things. That's how the world works. Journalists sometimes get confused, people are misquoted, whatever else. There is no monolithic government-approved official story.
I want to know who's certifying this.
I don't know.
Story.
It's like, which one are you talking about? And of course, the reason they have to have that is so that they can have a straw man to bounce against. Well, the official story says that. What are you talking about? Well, this one thing.
It's also part of their narrative that the government hands down the official story, like the tablets, from the mountain, and that because they're. Yeah, that they're the big power behind the scenes, and so if you not that, and again the more you push them, again the rabbit hole always keeps going deeper and deeper and deeper. It has to, because every time you reveal some kind of flaw in their logic or evidence, they deepen and broaden the conspiracy in order to account for it. So the more you push them, the deeper it goes. It's like, well, why is the press misreporting this? Well, because they're in on it, obviously. So why hasn't Russia pointed out that we never went to the moon? Well, because there's a worldwide shadow government that controls both Russia and the United States. This is literally what they say. You just keep making the conspiracy bigger until they're running the world, right? The New World Order, they're running the entire world, and therefore everything that happens is to prop up the conspiracy, whatever that is. Whatever evidence is there, whatever evidence is not there, it's a false flag, so no matter what evidence is out there, it's consistent with the conspiracy. So it could never be disproved. You just have to go deeper and wider. And they all get there eventually because you have to in order to prop up an otherwise flimsy conspiracy theory.
Do you think, in combating this, facts don't tend to work because of what you just said. Do you think there's if the rest of the panel can answer this, do you think there's meat on the bone to attack it from the perspective of teaching people that their very thinking is flawed? They're talking about the mechanism of coming to conclusions and stuff like that. Could that ease people out of conspiratorial thinking instead of trying to say, look, here's this fact and here's this fact, it doesn't jibe with this, because it's going to keep making them dig, right? Is there any way to attack the intuition by saying this is why you think anything whatsoever?
So, I get emails from people who listen to my show and say that they used to believe in this conspiracy or that conspiracy, and some even have said that they listen to my show to hear, what the other side thinks and to make fun of us or whatever. And because we talk about so many different issues, including some that are not going to be part of their preferred narrative, eventually, so at least in these these anecdotal cases that self-report to me, some people claim that they eventually learned the critical thinking skills, and there's the hard part, were able to apply it to their preferred narrative or belief system. So in individual cases, yes, I think that it can. I think the way to do it is this backdoor method. You don't do a full frontal assault because all the evidence shows that people will dig in. You'll just actually make them believe it more because now you're motivating them to think of more reasons to believe in their conspiracy or whatever their true belief is. But if you just say, all right, well, let's talk about something else over here, that you don't care about, and then you sort of develop sort of their critical thinking skills and perspective, and then you just have to hope that one day they'll be able to apply it to something that they care about.
Just to kind of expand on or piggyback on what Steve said, I think if we didn't think that we could make a difference in the way people think about these things, we wouldn't spend so much time trying to do that. It does feel like spinning our wheels. It feels like a Sisyphusian task. It's whack-a-mole. It's a constant uphill battle. But at the same time, progress is always made. You hear progress being made. You also hear about people digging in and people becoming more polarized in their views. And I think that regarding the backdoor idea, I think the real key here is that people need to be able to save face. And so one of the reasons things like making fun of them, but not to their face, like South Park or something like that, works is because people have the ability to watch that and convince themselves that they never actually believed those things.
Right. It's those other
ridiculous.
Silly people.
Those other silly people believe those things because you're not making them commit to it and then face it. Now, when I'm in the classroom, I actually make my students commit to problems and face them, but that's part of learning psychological principles and the fact that we're all human and we all do it. So, and they need to face that they're human too, but that's something a little bit different. That's not a specific belief. I think when you're talking about people's beliefs, they tend to sacralize their beliefs and their ideology. And when they make it sacred, you can't hurt it. You can't harm it. Unless you can give them the room to back away from them without having to lose some social interaction or some pride.
Yeah, I sort of split the difference between these two. One of the examples, there's actually two that I can think of. When some of the stories were circulating about Obama being a Muslim, I'm a writer for Discovery News, and I wrote a piece on that, and I very, very carefully outlined exactly why it was crystal clear that Obama was not a Muslim. I figured no one else had done that. Everyone was ridiculing. Oh, well, clearly, I was like, no, I happen to know something about Islam, and and so I went through and I said, well, for example, we know that Obama's not a Muslim because it's actually against Islam to call yourself anything but a Muslim as a Christian, which Obama has done. So that would disqualify him as Muslim. Furthermore, during this particular, it was actually Ramadan when I wrote this. He said he was actually seen eating lunch. That means he couldn't be following Islam. By definition, I'm not making it's right there. And so I laid it all out, and I thought,
But in his heart.
in his heart, right? And he wasn't really. He spit it out.
wasn't really eating
He spit it out. We know he's a Muslim because someone took a photo of Obama doing that. And so I wrote this piece, and I figured it was pretty straightforward. It wasn't attacking anybody in particular. I was just like, look, this is the claim. This is how we know. We in fact know this is not true. Look it up yourself. And I got the usual hate-mean cranks, nut jobs, people accusing me of Obama sympathizer, blah blah blah. But I thought it was important to address that head on because other skeptics weren't doing that. I'm not saying the only person that did it, but I just. No one, this is a big claim. It's making the national news, and here you go. And the second example that I give is that there's a handful of conspiracy theories. Most of them, as you may have guessed, are essentially impervious to being solved because as we talked about, there's no answer that will satisfy true conspiracy theorists. That being said, there are a handful of conspiracy theorists that are essentially dead. One of them, one that I often bring up, is the Paul is dead conspiracy. That Paul McCartney died, and that there was, I'm sure you all are familiar with it, there was all sorts of evidence. If you look in this photo, the cover of this album, this lyric says this, there's a hand over his head on Sgt. Pepper, blah, blah, blah. This means, and people took this really seriously. Not everyone did, but this was not a joke. And at this point, in 2014, Paul isn't dead, as far as I know. I've been watching the news lately, but it's crystal clear to anybody who's not a total idiot, which, granted is not everybody in the conspiracy world, that Paul McCartney is in fact alive and he wasn't replaced by a robot, and all that was simply not true. And so one of the reasons that I bring that case up is because certainly for people of my generation, that was before their time. So they can say, oh yeah, I heard about that. Weren't those old folks silly? It's like, well, see, that's sort of going back to what Barbara said. It was like, well, no, this is what they believed. This is the evidence that was put forth for that. And look at this case. It's one of several, but look at this case. It was clearly, undisputably wrong. And I've had a couple people say, wow, okay. And then I say, well, how can you apply that to, Obama this or Newtown that?
Yeah, but just to follow up on that is you're talking about people who are amenable to logic and evidence, and I do think that that's a lot of people. Though I think that what we're trying to do is provide the information and the examples and the understanding of critical thinking for the people out there who are capable of actually changing their mind. And if all they're hearing is the conspiracy nonsense, there's a lot of people who may buy it because why would so many people be talking about it? But you can change their mind because they're not hardcore conspiracy theorists. And it's a continuum. I don't want to have a false dichotomy here. It's a continuum, and there are people who are just psychologically it actually becomes a diagnosable mental illness at some point, paranoid schizophrenia, and there's people all along that spectrum. And I think there are some people just too far down that spectrum to ever turn around. Those are obviously not the people we're trying to teach or to try to dissuade from their conspiracy theory. And they're actually, I know Ben wasn't being serious when he said this, but it's not about intelligence, because these are sometimes schizophrenics and people who are at this end of the spectrum are very intelligent. They know a lot of facts. At least they're intelligent in that certain way. It's just that these conspiracy theories sing to them and they cannot get away from them. It's just the way their mind works. They don't have the reality testing. There's a module in their brain that's not working, and so they get stuck in the pattern recognition. They can't get away from it.
I think it's really important to recognize that a lot of these people are highly intelligent, and sometimes intelligence actually gets in the way. Because if you're intelligent enough to understand logic and how it works, you can actually do some pretty impressive mental gymnastics to make everything fit into a picture that is coherent and makes sense.
They're really good at rationalizing.
And intelligence is separate from rationality. I mean, intelligence is important for solving problems and thinking rationally, but it is not a component that completely explains rationality, not even close. There are lots of other components that explain it as well, like open-minded thinking, for example. So if you're highly intelligent and you're rather closed-minded and stubborn, you're not going to think very rationally.
There's I suggest everyone is interested in this. There's a great handbook that's free online. I'm sure you've all read it. It's the John Cook and Stephen Lewandowski, the Debunking Handbook, that talks about backfire effects, like you were talking about. And there's actually like several flavors of the backfire effect. And the backfire effect is just whenever someone doesn't believe in something and you present them evidence to the contrary, they then don't believe in it double so. They suggest that you, whenever you're trying to debunk something, you can reinforce the false belief if you start by re-mentioning the false belief. You should start with correct information and lead with it, and never mention the myth unless you absolutely have to. And if you do mention it toward the end of whatever piece you're producing.
Yeah.
And try to offer only a few examples. They actually recommend 3 as sort of a golden number, because the fewer examples you offer, the easier it is to remember what you said. And if you offer a whole lot of examples and you try to remember it, you have a difficult time remembering all of the examples, and you have this intuition like that, well, it's kind of hard to think about this, so therefore it might not be true. But something that's easy to think about is easier to believe is true. So a few examples, especially in story form, that are enjoyable and it's not really mean, and don't lead with the myth, let the myth either be at the end or not in it at all, is a pretty solid way if you're going to attack it like head on. So.
We used to call that the propaganda effect.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, where if you've heard something and it sounds familiar, you're more likely to believe that it's true simply because it sounds familiar, because familiarity breeds discomfort. And so you favor the familiar. That's the familiarity effect, obviously. But the propaganda effect is that specific thing that you're more likely to believe something that you've heard before, because you don't remember the context of which when you heard it, or that somebody said X, Y, and Z are wrong. You just remember X, Y, and Z. It's just familiar.
Yeah. I'm sorry. One last thing too. In that, they also mentioned that if your debunking eliminates a narrative construction that has become a way that they've explained the world to themselves, you have to fill the gap in. Otherwise, it'll be too difficult. They no longer have an explanation for something, and they'll just go back to the myth. You have to give them a piece that plugs in, that lets that narrative
anchor.
live.
Yeah.
And so don't just like kill people's false beliefs. Give them something to prop themselves back up again to understand the world.
But sometimes that alternate narrative, the skeptical narrative, is hard. It takes years to like really wrap your mind around. Ben was talking about the just asking questions. That's all anomaly hunting. So they'll take an event and they'll say, well, why was this guy there? That can't just be a coincidence. Like, no, that could be a coincidence, because the real world is really messy and lots of weird stuff is happening all the time. Like at the Newport event. Newtown, sorry. My family lives in Newtown. But in the Newtown event, the cops picked up some guy who was like walking through the woods by the school. They put him in the police car. They questioned him for 5 minutes, and then they let him go. What the hell was that all about? That seems like this unexplainable anomaly. And so the conspiracy theorists had chewed on that for a lot. It turns out the guy was a private detective who happened to be there, who heard that there was a kerfuffle, went to investigate it. The cops were interrogating everybody, so they picked him up. He said, hey, I'm a private detective. Or maybe he was an off-duty cop. I think actually he was an off-duty cop. They said, oh, you're an off-duty cop? Okay. They had a 5-minute conversation and let him go. Once you know that piece of information, he was an off-duty cop, it's like, okay, that all I can sort of make sense now. But you never know all the little bits of information like that. You never know, like, just chaotic, crazy stuff happens because that's life. But that's the stuff that they just never sits well with the conspiracy theorists. Like, no, there's got to be a specific, this is also the agency detection. Somebody deliberately did this. This didn't just happen by itself. Why? Stuff just happens by itself. That's life. But that's a whole different way of looking at the world. And until you really get them to sort of wrap their head around that, it's hard to give them the alternate narrative, because otherwise there's too many missing pieces for them.
Yeah, they don't get it. I mean, I remember I wrote a piece on the Newtown shootings. There were a couple of things that I especially remember. One of them was one of their pieces of evidence, I use that term very loosely, was that there was video footage of a parent who was about to go up to talk to reporters, and you can see this and I had to watch the video several times because it was just mind-numbingly bad. But anyway, so I had to watch this thing, and there's 3 or 4 people coming out, and the parent's about to address the press and explain what's going on. And as they come through the doors, the guy was laughing. And as he approached the microphone, he stood up and he said, well, this is, this is I think it was his son died, if I'm not mistaken. And this was pounced upon. Well, this is obviously an actor. This is an actor because no one who lost a child would be laughing 1 second and then get up in front of the microphone and be able to, be somber and address this. And they'd be bawling horribly. Like, what the hell do you know?
Yeah.
Where the hell? Really? This is what you got? Is you're accusing this man who's lost a family member of being an actor? Because in your mind, because apparently your degree in psychology tells you that there's no way this could, it's just absurd. I mean, the fact is that everyone grieves in their own way, and just because you've had a child killed doesn't mean that you're sobbing uncontrollably for the next 48 hours. It just means that you deal with it in a certain way, and I don't know what was said right before they went through the door. Maybe they tripped. I don't know.
Or what he was thinking.
Or what he was thinking, right?
And remembering something funny that his child did.
Yeah, and yet this is seized upon as evidence that this is it was just astonishing to me.
It's as if they can explain every little thing that happens, and the inability to do so is evidence that there's a conspiracy. But
exactly.
It's really naive. It's profoundly naive that you think you could explain why every little thing happens the way it does. There's just too many variables.
Well, it demonstrates scientific illiteracy. I mean, that's what it's demonstrating, is not understanding.
I don't know if it's really a demonstration of scientific illiteracy or a demonstration of simply irrationality.
Well, I mean, the method, this is not a person who would say, correct me if I'm wrong, but, they're saying they're unaware. Like when I see arguments on social media, like about climate change, and someone tries to bring up, like, well, this scientist says this, and and there's this consensus. The literacy I'm talking about is like thinking that scientists work the way they work on movies and stuff. That they're
well, there's certainly an element of that.
Not understanding the process and the debate that takes place, and
the fuzziness of it all.
And how hard science is, and how it's a long process, and it takes a lot of time to come to. Like, that is not really well understood, generally speaking.
I think generally speaking, we don't typically understand complexities that well. And I mean, it depends. We have a lot of complex knowledge, but it's each individual has complex knowledge in certain domains. And if you're not a scientist, you may not understand just how complex a lot of the things that we study are and how fuzzy they are. And trying to explain one little aspect of it when it's got all these other things attached to it can be very, very difficult, and we tend to oversimplify them. And so it comes across as, I think that some people do think that it's more simple than it is, simply because our explanations are simple.
I mean, I just imagine like the type of person who would say that. I mean, if they had two scientists in their kitchen, like climate scientists in their kitchen, telling them, hey, this is what I think based off of what I've seen. I mean, would they be just as, would they believe that they know as much about the world as these climate scientists and debate it in that way? Because that's what it seems like when you see a long comment
I
thread.
see people write blog posts after listening to a 15-minute podcast and thinking that they're an expert. So I think we're all a little guilty of that, of thinking that because we have wrapped our brains around something, because it was explained to us simply, that we fully understand it. That's a problem in any domain, I think.
I've seen it framed really well. There's some meme that I've seen go around where they show like a bridge, and it says, 97% of engineers say this bridge is unsafe, and 3% say it's okay to drive across it, so what are you going to do? And that reframing it into another context kind of helps people go, well, I know that bridge building is probably pretty hard, but climate science is difficult to understand, so it's hard to approach it from that perspective.
And there's a lack of humility
Yes.
implicit in all of this. And that's one of the other bits of the skeptical narrative that I particularly try to hammer home, is you have to have humility. You have to ask at some point, how do I really know I'm not wrong? And also be comfortable with the fact that you'll never really 100% know that you're not wrong. You always have to say, I could be wrong. And think about how is it possible that you could be wrong? Whereas conspiracy theorists that process is not there at all. They know that they're right, and they were just backfilling information to confirm what they know in their heart to be true because they've seen it, they feel it. They just know that there's a conspiracy there, and that's because that narrative again just has an iron grip on their psyche, and they have zero humility in my personal experience when it comes to things like that. They think that they could drill down to any level of detail, no better than scientists. That again, there's just the notion that maybe we just don't know that because the world is complicated. It doesn't factor in.
I'll just add one thing that I think is a common misperception. Is that it's important not to overestimate the number of conspiracy theorists out there. Because I hear conspiracies this, conspiracies that. Yes, there's a lot of conspiracies out there. There's a lot of people who believe them. But just because someone forwards something or likes something on Facebook or forwards it to somebody else on social media doesn't necessarily mean that they personally endorse it. I came across this many times where someone like, here's some conspiracy about Obama, this, that, the other, 9/11, and they just spread this stuff around. And now people, this was spread, 2.2, for example, the Newtown video. It was like seen something ridiculous, like 2.3 million times or something. And so, so look at all these people. No. Just because I watched it 3 times, okay? Just because that has that many hits or views does not necessarily mean that everyone who saw that bought into it or thought it was completely true or went to Alex Jones's website or anything else. It just means that they looked at it, and so I think because we all deal with this here, but I just think it's important to recognize that it's easy to sort of overestimate this and be too alarmist about it, because just because you share something and talk about something doesn't necessarily mean you subscribe to it, and a lot of it is actually it's people who are they're angry about they don't like Obama, so they're going to endorse a conspiracy theory about Obama. No?
No.
Hey, listen to me. I was wondering if anybody has any questions for the panelists. You should line up to I had a feeling so. That's what I was worried about. We're going to run out of time. You got 15 minutes. Go.
Oh my gosh, I'm on the screen. So I am an average person, average intellect, very much vulnerable to false pattern recognition, and I'm constantly bombarded with information. And as an average person, what are some tools that I can use to sort through, like, the fact and crap?
Yeah, I mean, it's good to have a process, and I think a basic process, like I obviously do this all the time. I get confronted with questions I have no idea about, and you got to start somewhere. One basic process that I do is to try to find out what the various sides are saying. Often there may be 2 sides, or there may be more than 2 sides. And you kind of, I never really trust what one side is saying until I hear what the other side is saying about what they're saying. And then you have to just follow that process until you see, so who's sort of getting the final word here, And you could also it's also perfectly reasonable to look for consensus. If there is a consensus among people who should know, that's also a good place to start. And the good news is that the information is there. It's all on the internet. Most of the time you're going to be able to find access to it. So there's just no shortcut around the fact that you need to have Google skills, in this world. If you want to find information, unless you're going to just listen to somebody else. The information's there, but it could be hard to get to sometimes the reliable information. So you got to know how to find good sources, know how to search well, know how to evaluate positions, and basically just don't believe anything until you've, I don't decide who really has the correct perspective until I've completely processed through the exchange. Usually then one side will change the subject, and then there's never any answer to what I consider to be the definitive answer on the other side, and so that sort of scores 1 point for that side, if you will. But there's no shortcut. It's a process.
I would just add 2 things to that. One is that there are several sources, different constructions of something called a baloney detection kit. Lots of websites have them that have a very, very short, very simple list of things that you can look for to see if it's maybe pseudoscience. And another thing, kind of surefire red flags. They're very basic, but they're a good start. And another thing that I like to do is I like to have sources that I've consulted many, many times and I now trust because I think they do tell both sides of the story and give a balanced view. And I have a list of those. For example, if I have any questions about medicine, because I know very little about medicine, I go to Science-Based Medicine, which is one of Steve's sites, and search and see what they have to say about a topic. So there are some sites out there you can build some trust with.
The only thing I would add is just to actually seek out the skeptical position on a lot of these things, because also the skeptics have no answer for this. I'm like, well, of course they do. It's right there. It's like, did you look? Well, no.
Put the word Snopes in your Google search.
Yeah, I mean, so I'll just over and over I see, no one's ever explained this. Well, yeah, look it up. It's not that no one's ever done it. It's just that the skeptical answers are not bandied about in the conspiracy world because it's immediately assumed to be disinformation. So again, just because someone suggests that this is the fatal flaw in their argument, well, just look into it. It's probably been explained very, very adequately.
And add to your Google skills. Be very mindful that Google is the most powerful accelerator of confirmation bias. So there's actually there's something in psychology they call the make sense stopping rule, which is as you're searching for information, you stop at the point when you feel like it makes sense, that it jives with your preconceived notions of what would make sense. And you have to kind of push through that moment and keep going past it.
You have to try to prove yourself wrong.
Right.
Exactly.
That's the falsification principle. You always want to look for the information that proves what you already think wrong.
Like actually form a very basic hypothesis. What do I think so far? And then try to disprove that.
Thank you.
Sure.
This still works. Does it still work? Yeah. One other thing on the Google thing, make sure when you do that, log out of Google and then search, because it keeps your history and it'll confirm your bias more toward you.
It'd be your little echo chamber.
Yeah, or DuckDuckGo. That's basically Google with all of that. So otherwise you'll just get stuff you like anyway.
Okay, so so I have a two-part question. The first one's really quick, and it's pretty much a yes or no. I've noticed over the 20th century, there's more access to information, like with. Okay.
Just talk.
Okay, so.
Bend down, just talk.
Okay, all right.
He'll raise the volume.
Okay.
He'll take care of it.
I've noticed there's more information available through TV, radio, internet. Are conspiracy theories getting more complicated or complex? Like when we go from Kennedy to the Illuminati to 9/11, and that's just a yes or no question.
I don't think they're getting more complex. I mean, you can go back to the Jewish blood libel for example. I mean, there's no, the conspiracy theories are nothing new. Although certainly, with the proliferation of the internet and mass media, it's much easier to go everywhere. The other thing, of course, is that in centuries past, people didn't know about the rest of the world. You grew up in a village, you probably died within 50 miles of your village, and nothing important happened.
There's probably less to explain.
Yes, somebody's cow died. Whoa, did you hear that? Oh my God! And that's it. These days, we get news from all over the world, and there's much more grist for the mill.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll add just there was a conspiracy theory surrounding the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, just as complicated as the conspiracy theory surrounding the assassination of JFK.
Okay.
The only difference now is there's more of everything because there's more information, so there's more of everything. But I think the conspiracy theories have always been around.
Yeah. Conspiracy thinking is just an element of human thinking, and they'll always be around, always has been. There always have been conspiracy theories. And I think, if anything, one of the great things about the internet is that no matter what you believe, you're going to be confronted with people that disagree with it. Yeah. And you really, a lot of times in the past, you might not be confronted in that way about certain things, even things like spanking and stuff like that. So I think my speculation is that this will end up dampening conspiratorial thinking over time.
I think it's a double-edged sword, actually.
Yeah.
I think it does both.
Okay,
we gotta keep fighting because
one other thing, and then I will step away from this microphone. What do you guys feel about debating conspiracy theorists head-to-head in public? Like,
I'd rather get a root canal, frankly.
I think it's a lot
is
like
it wise?
I like
Is it
debating
helpful?
creationists.
Can you do anything? Like, is it smart?
I've done it on occasion. Sometimes I feel the need to, but I personally, it's sort of like debating creationists, and it's just sort of that we're operating on different standards of evidence. So I don't find it very fruitful, but
I like it. I do
so
it.
send them all to Steve. He'll take care of you.
You have to know what the venue is and what your goal is. You don't want to put yourself in a position where you have an unmoderated debate in a hostile environment where they're going to hit you with the gish gallop and it's a lose-lose situation. So if the venue is appropriate, if you have a good moderator, a controlled debate, and the audience, you're not going to change the mind of the person you're debating. That's not the point. The point is, are you going to get some message out to an audience? And then the other thing is, you got to know your shit up and down. Some people think that because they're right, they'll be able to handle the other side. So the evolutionary biologists got their butts handed to them by Duane Gish because they think, well, hey, evolution's right, creationism is nonsense, so that's all I need to know. What they didn't know is the specific arguments of the person that they're debating. And knowing that is a massive advantage. Luckily, they say it. They say they're out there, so it's not challenging. If you do your homework, you'll know what all the arguments. You know what you're going to get hit with. So if you do it right, it could be a win, but you got to do it right.
Hi, I heard you talk about what you might be able to do to break someone from a conspiracy theory, and the woman earlier asked what could be done to prevent herself from buying into conspiracy theory. What do you think could be done to prevent other people from buying into conspiracy theory? Maybe something in education or something along that line.
How can you
Transparency is
institutionally
the
prevent
best
another Newtown?
Yeah, I mean, my answer is what I talked about before is give the example, the Paul is dead Beatles thing, and just say, because it's non-threatening, presumably, your family member hasn't, paid $5,000 supporting this. It's sort of it's a third-party, non-threatening conspiracy. You can just say, look at this yourself. We all know this wasn't true, and then maybe lead them towards what they do.
I think as far as prevention is concerned, as a culture, we need to be as transparent as we can be with everything. I mean, there are certain things that during, say, a police investigation that can't be public and information that can't be shared, but we need to be as transparent as possible, and the more transparent we are, the less the less ammunition we're giving people, the less misunderstandings can be twisted and so forth.
You mentioned once, Steve, about how poorly handled the bin Laden thing was. It was perfectly set up to make people believe it was conspiracy. There's got to be like a guideline in place that don't do things like that.
It's hard. I mean, like the CDC likes to play things close to the vest, and the government sometimes they cover stuff up. Sometimes just because that's what they do, and they're not anticipating the conspiracy and being transparent. So I do think that transparency will help. Nothing's going to prevent the conspiracies from coming up, but I do think, again, we're talking about the middle of the road average person who might fall into the conspiracy thing because that's the information that they're encountering, or because there's some seriously shady things out there, and that provides an explanation. So there's no one answer, but I think, more transparency, teaching critical thinking, and skeptics jumping on these conspiracies, trying to nip them in the bud will help.
Here's another clue for you all. The walrus was Paul. I do think that more education would definitely help. I have a question for the entire panel. What is your favorite conspiracy theory? Not one that comes up a lot, not one that you have to deal with, or one that you even know a lot. What is your favorite? My personal favorite is the conspiracy that HAARP, the High Altitude Auroral Research Project, is controlling the weather. They basically bounce high-frequency radio waves into the atmosphere in order to study the atmosphere. It's interesting. And people are convinced that it's causing all these hurricanes and thunderstorms, and it caused Katrina and all this nonsense. So that's my personal favorite.
And he was the last question, just so you know.
I tend to like the ones that have to do with things like we've cured cancer and doctors are keeping that information from you because they want you to be sick. But I think probably my favorite is chemtrails, because that one's just because I love hearing people talk about them. Because there's nothing you can say. I mean, it's just I really don't know what to say when people talk about it.
Beautiful.
That may be true.
Probably my favorite is involved with UFOs and aliens. I mean, of all the subjects that I research, by far the most conspiracy-laden subject is aliens and cover-ups. And the one I especially like is the one where the U.S. government in particular, Western in general, but the U.S. government in particular, is covering up knowledge that we have in fact contacted aliens. There's dead bodies in Roswell, this and that. And that because they don't want anybody to know about it because it would panic the world, this and that. And yet, I keep seeing on the front page of the New York Times scientists and astronomers who are excited about discovering a habitable Earth-like planet that could have life on it. So somehow, these astronomers who didn't get the memo that you're not supposed to say this because that would suggest that maybe there's intelligent life elsewhere. So it's like, what do you think all these people are spending all this time and effort on to find if there's intelligent life elsewhere if we already know it because it's in Hangar 18? I mean, I don't get it. It's a cover story.
Right.
Clearly.
I like the classics, and I'm partial to the moon hoax landing one because there's a lot of scientific meat there. So I think I have fun delving deep into that one. But any really big conspiracy theory I find fascinating. There's a lot of really ridiculous ones, but I mean, there's the big one, the big classic ones are always fun for me.
Because of all the moving parts that you can
A
explore.
lot of moving
Yeah.
parts. A lot of moving parts.
Stuff to grab onto.
I want to say Satanism and the Satanic Panic, because that was something that was big in my childhood, and my mom still believes it. But the one I actually love the most, and no one's heard this because it comes from close to my hometown. There's a town called Baxterville, Mississippi, and it's a really, really small town and a really, really, really weird place. And before I became a journalist, I worked construction, and I worked there for 2 weeks helping install a water tower. And Baxterville, Mississippi is one of the few places where they conducted a nuclear test, aside from Nevada and from like the Bikini Islands and stuff like that, because they have a big salt dome there and they've tested it underneath. So there's been a conspiracy theory in Mississippi forever that if you go to Baxterville, all the people and the animals are like mutated and weird. And having gone there, I don't know if I do or do not believe in this conspiracy.
What is the threshold for weird animals there? I really have to wonder.
Well, the people say that like the animals are like three-headed foxes. I mean, nobody's seen it.
Either they are, they're not. I mean, come
well,
on.
they're not, but
Okay.
people, it's like Bigfoot,
No blinkies.
But the people the people are so weird that they think that it's anything that's peculiar in that part of the world, and there's plenty of it, is attributed to those tests. So.